Hello, my name is Michael Cagle, Principal of Kennedale High School. Today I want to share part one of a presentation with our stakeholders regarding the TEA 2020-21 Principal Residency Grant for Cycle 3. The purpose of part one of the presentation is to provide an early timeline and a basic overview of the grant. I will follow part one of the presentation with additional segments where I will provide more information and cover different aspects of the grant in more detail. In part two of the presentation, I will examine the recruiting, application, and hiring processes of potential residents. This presentation is intended for informational purposes only and to provide a better background for our stakeholders, our district and campus leaders, and potential principal residents. Most of the contents of this presentation are directly from the grant application and the requirements that were laid out by TEA. However, I have provided some recommendations to district and campus leaders to assist in the initial launch of the grant, as district and campus leaders organize the overseeing committee of the grant. The KISD superintendent is Chad G, and the assistant superintendent is Dr. Julie Vu. Mr. G and Dr. Vu will lead our district's efforts in implementing and organizing the components of the grant. I'm going to get started today by sharing some links with you. The first link at the top takes you to the TEA Grants Opportunity page. Here you can find all the information related to this grant and others. When you go to this page, you will search for the 2020-21 Principal Residency Grant for Cycle 3. Then you will find all of the documents pertaining to the grant, such as the grant requirements, which we have to follow, and the attachments that must be used to design and evaluate our program. The second link takes you to the TEA Grants Awarded page, where you're going to find a list of districts, including Kennedale ISD, that were awarded the residency grant for Cycle 3. You can access the KISD grant application that was submitted and approved by TEA from this page, or you can use the link at the bottom of the page to access the KISD application directly. It is important for our district and campus leaders to read and review the grant application to gain a better understanding of the contents and to understand that I will not be covering every aspect of the grant in this introductory presentation. It is also important to find the final pages of the grant application and look at the total grant budget. Today I'm going to break down our budget so I can show you how we are going to spend money on each resident, but I will not be evaluating this grant budget as a whole. Again, the application has the total grant budget that we submitted for the grant cycle if you would like to reference it. Before I dive into the grant, I would like to take a look at the grant process and history. We submitted our written application for the grant in November of 2019. TEA had originally planned to score the written grant applications in December and early January and ultimately announced the grant winners in January of 2020. However, TEA had to change the original grant timeline and did not score the written grants until late January. This is important because the announcement of the grant awards did not come until mid-March while we were on spring break. And then the COVID-19 virus caused schools to be shut down and caused TEA to require employees to work from home. The late announcement of the grant combined with the COVID-19 closures have slowed TEA's grant processes and compressed our timeline to implement the grant. We are in a bit of a time crunch to get our residents selected and the program underway. I will go over the early grant timeline in the next few slides. We have some timelines and deadlines that we have to meet. The most important is that we have to get all of our residents selected and approved in early May so that they can start their coursework at the University of Texas at Tyler by May 11th, 2020 of this year. Going back to the grant application process, we received a high enough score on the written portion of the grant application to advance to the oral interview round. Dr. Vu and I conducted the oral interview with TEA, and based upon the final cumulative score of the oral and written parts of the application, we received the grant award. At the bottom, you can see that Kennedale ISD was the recipient of the grant for Cycle 3 out of the 41 schools that applied for it. I want to go through our early grant timeline because I do want everyone, including our potential residents, to understand that we have some tight deadlines. In part two of this presentation, I will look at the recruiting and application timeline for residents more in depth, but for now, I want to focus on the general early implementation timeline for the grant. This timeline is designed more for our district and campus leaders. However, potential residents can gain some understanding of what to expect in the coming weeks and months. In early to mid-April, KISD must first complete an MOU, which is a contractual agreement with the University of Texas at Tyler. For the grant, we chose UT Tyler as the EPP, which is the Educator Preparation Program for this grant cycle. I know that as of today, university and district leaders are working to finalize this agreement. KISD must also conduct grant negotiations with TEA to work out any agreed upon changes to the original grant application and changes to the original budget. I do want to note that TEA sent correspondence to districts that the COVID-19 closure has slowed grant negotiations, and as of today, they have not started this process with the Principal Residency Grant. The grant negotiations will be conducted through the Chief Financial Officer of KISD. While the MOU and grant negotiations are finalized, one of the most important first steps is that KISD must organize and convene what we called in the grant the KISD Principal Resident Grant Committee, which is responsible for overseeing the grant and the residency design. This committee is the body that we defined in the grant that is responsible for developing all of the grant processes, including those for the recruiting, application, interviewing, and hiring processes with potential residents and for developing all associated timelines. The recruiting, application, and hiring process will be the first order of business because of our compressed spring timeline. During the recruiting, application, and hiring process, there are many things that are required by TEA for this grant or that we said that we would do in our grant application. I will discuss these requirements more in depth in part 2 of this presentation. One of the things that I need to stress is that KISD teachers or staff members who are even remotely interested in applying for a KISD principal resident position should start the application process to the UT Tyler Graduate School and School of Education as soon as possible. And any district and campus leaders who recruit potential residents as part of our efforts with this grant should encourage potential residents to apply to UT Tyler, even if they do this before they submit an application for a principal resident position with the district or during the application process. When applying to UT Tyler, potential residents will have to submit transcripts, service records, letters of recommendation, and more. Depending on their GPAs, they may or may not have to submit GRE scores. By encouraging our potential residents to simultaneously apply to UT Tyler and to KISD, we can assure that our finalists have time to collect and submit these documents and are able to start the online graduate program on May 11th of this year. As part of the grant, the committee is required to host a public outreach event for potential residents. This public outreach event must be in conjunction with UT Tyler, and it must have a question and answer session. Because of the COVID-19 closure, we are having to adjust our original plans of having a face-to-face public information for potential residents. Instead, we are planning to host a virtual public meeting for teachers and staff members who are interested in the program. Tentatively, we are planning on hosting the virtual KISD 2021 Principal Residency Program Information Meeting for potential residents in late April. Our target date is April 24th of 2020. The reason we have this date in mind is that KISD has a TEA webinar about the grant program scheduled for April 23rd. So we hope that the April 24th date will allow us to gather updated information and provide it to interested parties after grant negotiations are complete and after we get this updated information from TEA. In late April, KISD will collect resident applications through the Region 11 Job Board. The committee will develop job descriptions and application requirements soon. We specifically included some of the application requirements in the original grant application. The committee will send out instructions and links to the job postings via the KISD website, email, social media postings, and other methods. Interviews for the KISD principal resident positions will begin in late April. Applicants can expect multiple rounds of interviews as we outlined in the grant. Finalists will be announced in early May, and final round committee interviews will be conducted in early May. The committee will then collaborate with campus principals to determine best fits from the selected finalists before campus placements are determined and recommended by the committee to the KISD superintendent. In early to mid-May, the KISD superintendent will then review these recommendations and submit the names of the recommended hires to the KISD Board of Trustees. Depending on the authority granted to the superintendent, the board may vote on whether or not to approve the principal residents for hire in 2021 before contracts can be issued by KISD. This timeline for the recruitment, application, and hiring process is the one I recommend to ensure that our residents can begin at UT Tyler on May 11th of 2020 with the long Summer 1 cohort. However, I must note that this general timeline may be modified by the committee. After principal residents have been approved, the committee must assign site mentors to residents. These mentors are usually campus principals, but don't always have to be. Everyone must keep in mind residents and mentors must attend the TEA Principal Residency Summer Institute in the June of 2020. We don't have the dates for the institute from TEA yet, but it is something we know is coming. One thing we cannot predict, however, is whether or not TEA will be able to host a face-to-face institute or will be forced to hold a virtual institute because of the COVID-19 outbreak. Hopefully, we will find out in our webinar on April 23rd. In June of 2020, after resident selections have been made, the committee will shift its focus to the next stage of program development, which is residency design and planning the job-related experiences of the residents. In July of 2020, which is as far out as I'm going to go with the timeline, after residents begin their contracts with KISD for 2020-21, we said in the grant that the committee would host a 5-day Principal Resident Summer Institute with professional development, training, and onboarding activities to give residents a foundation and to prepare them for their campus placements. I want to make a note that although we identified the Principal Resident Committee as the body that's going to oversee the grant, we also said that the KISD District Educational Improvement Committee, or DEIC, will be the evaluative committee for the grant. The DEIC will be responsible for monitoring and evaluating program effectiveness by using the rubrics in the attachments of the grant that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. So for this grant, we have an organizing committee and we have a separate committee to ensure that we meet our grant goals, objectives, and benchmarks that we outlined in the grant application. These committees will work together to ensure that we meet the assurances of the grant, make any necessary program modifications, and meet the requirements of the grant with fidelity. Now that we've covered the general early timeline of the grant, I want to shift gears and discuss the TEA purpose of the grant and the assurances outlined in the grant that we must follow. This is part of our broader overview of the TEA Principal Residency Grant. When we look at the purpose of the TEA grant, this is a grow your own program. TEA has a grant out there that is a grow your own teacher program for districts. However, this is a grant designed to help us grow our own leaders through internal leadership pipelines through full-time year-long principal residencies. Some other things to note from the TEA grant purpose is that in our recruitment processes, we are targeting and selecting recruits from our current staff. We are not selecting from outside of the organization. We are also required to partner with an effective educator preparation program, or an EPP. In this grant cycle, unlike the previous two grant cycles, TEA actually defined who those are based upon the performance from previous grant cycles. So TEA provided a list of effective EPPs to districts, and for several reasons, including effectiveness, relatively low tuition and program costs, and the convenience of the online platform of the program, we chose University of Texas at Tyler. Finally, we must provide year-long full-time principal residencies with a focus on authentic campus-based leadership experiences in collaboration with UT Tyler. One of the biggest things TEA has stressed in this grant cycle is instructional leadership opportunities. Now I'd like to look at some of the general assurances of the TEA grant which must be followed by KISD. I'm not going to read this entire list to you as they are listed in the program requirements, but I will highlight some of the things that I think are important for you to know in this introductory video. In the second assurance, we must assure that residents do not have significant classroom responsibilities. In the KISD grant application, however, we took this assurance one step further. We said that KISD residents will have no classroom responsibilities during their year-long full-time residencies. Next, we are looking for fresh faces. We are looking for current staff members who do not hold a principal certification. So staff members who already hold a principal certification are not eligible for this program. We also must assign site mentors, which I've already discussed. And in bullet number 6, mentors and residents must attend the TEA Principal Residence Summer Institute in June. Those were assurances 1 through 5. Now we're going to examine assurances 6 through 8. And number 6, when we design experiences for residents, we have to assure that we provide residents with opportunities for certification, evidence-based coursework, opportunities to practice and be evaluated in a school setting, and provide consistent coaching and evaluation with a minimum of 6 sessions per year. One note, besides being assigned a site mentor by KISD, UT Tyler will also assign each resident a field supervisor from their current faculty. These field supervisors will provide residents with support through regular coaching and evaluation opportunities. And number 7, we must use the rubrics and attachments 2 and 3 to design and evaluate our program. I encourage all of our campus and district leaders to review and become familiar with those rubrics as we move forward. And then in number 8, after we have signed our MOU with UT Tyler, we must email it to TEA. TEA will not release 100% of the grant funds until the grant negotiations and the MOU are finalized and approved. In grant assurance number 9, again, we were given a list of effective EPP partners to choose from, and Kennedale ISD selected UT Tyler. In our final grant assurance, we go back to the MOU. The MOU we sign with UT Tyler must have all of the required elements identified by TEA, and those are in bullets on this screen. TEA is required to approve all MOUs and to assure these requirements are agreed upon by the district and the university. When discussing this TEA grant, the first question that we really need to answer is, why does KISD need this grant? And this is a great question. Prior to submitting the grant, we did a needs assessment to answer this question and to design a grant that would meet our needs. In our district needs assessment, the first need we identified was the need to improve the diversity of candidates for campus administrative positions. Through this grant, we plan to address this need through a targeted recruitment and selection process. At the end of part 1 of this presentation, I will reinforce that we have a target goal for resident recruitment, which is for 60% of the residents to be from our underrepresented minority populations. The next need that we identified was the need for internal administrative candidates. Too often it seems that we have to hire administrative candidates from other school districts. Let me give you one just example of that. For 2019-20, all 5 of the new district administrators at our secondary campuses, that's KHS and KHS, were hired from outside of the district, and currently there are only a few secondary teachers and staff members who hold principal certifications. These are just a couple of examples of why we want to develop an internal pipeline of qualified administrative candidates. The third need we identified is that we have high turnover rates in our administrative positions. Please note that some of this turnover is attributed to assistant principals attaining principalships or other promotions, and that not all of the turnover stems from negative reasons. Historically, for the last 3 to 5 years, we have seen an administrative turnover rate of greater than 50% at our secondary campuses. This turnover creates a need for KISD to replace about 3 to 5 campus administrators annually. By providing our residents relevant coursework, support from mentors and field supervisors, ongoing professional development, and tuition assistance, we can nurture our leaders, promote consistency, and provide opportunities to hire within. For this grant, we had to develop a SMART goal for the KISD Principal Residency Program. In our SMART goal, KISD, in a partnership with UT Tyler, is going to build strong campus leaders and help support internal leadership pipelines by establishing full-time, year-long residencies on each of the 5 Kennedale ISD campuses. It should be noted that from our internal pool of candidates, the committee will place 1 candidate per campus, and applicants should be aware that they may not be placed on a campus where they currently work. For example, an applicant from the high school, if selected for a resident position, could be placed at another campus, such as an elementary or middle level campus. Back to our SMART goal at the bottom, we have declared that our program target is for 100% of the residents to complete their coursework, to obtain their master's degree, to pass the principal certification exam, and to submit the artifacts and complete the requirements of PASL, ultimately for everyone to obtain their principal certificates by the end of August 2021. District and campus leaders must keep this SMART goal in mind when designing and evaluating the program. Along with the SMART goal, we had to develop benchmarks and objectives for the program. I'm not going to discuss the quarterly benchmarks in part 1 of this presentation. I will discuss the quarterly benchmarks in future segments of this presentation in detailed discussion in the role of the DEIC and program evaluation. Now we're going to focus on the organization of the grant, namely who will oversee and develop the resident program. I have already mentioned that the KISD Principal Resident Program Committee will oversee the program and is responsible for the overall program design. One of the reasons that I have limited the amount of information that I present on part 1 of this video is that, as I stated in the opening, this presentation is designed to provide a general overview and initial recommendations to the committee overseeing the grant. From here, the committee will oversee the program and develop program guidelines and processes. Future segments of the presentation will include the committee's processes, design, guidelines, and timelines, which are going to be developed at later dates. Part 2 of this presentation, in fact, will be developed as the committee develops and finalizes recruiting, application, and hiring processes. The leader of the committee by grant design is the KISD superintendent or designee. In looking at this committee, who are the key parties that are responsible to be on the committee? In the grant, we've named our KISD superintendent and district leaders, but we must also include representatives from the University of Texas Tyler, our campus principals and administrators, teachers, and anyone who KISD feels is important to this program from the district and campus levels. In this slide, I've outlined some of the key responsibilities of the committee. It's not an exhaustive list, and I will cover many other minor responsibilities in future segments of the presentation. This committee must use criteria established in the grant rubrics in attachments 2 and 3 and in the original grant application to design the program. This committee will use many forms of electronic communications to promote the program and to recruit potential residents. TA has emphasized that we have a strong digital presence with this program. The committee must collaborate with the Kennedale ISD Public Relations Coordinator to use the district website, email, Blackboard, mass communication system, social media, and more in all of these digital efforts. This committee is also responsible for providing a training program for site mentors to ensure mentors are equipped to provide ongoing support for our residents. The committee is responsible for the development of the program's KISD Principal Residency Summer Institute, which I mentioned is going to be used to onboard residents. And along with the KISD Principal Residency Summer Institute, the committee is ultimately responsible for developing all of the program's professional development activities and its professional development plan. And these are to provide professional growth opportunities for our residents. The final key responsibility includes collaborating with the DEIC to evaluate the program effectiveness and to implement necessary changes and ensure the fidelity of the program. The DEIC, again, is the evaluative committee of the grant. Now we are going to examine what comes with the grant, or what can the district and residents expect from the Principal Residency Grant. First of all, Kennedale ISD received a total of $350,000 to place 5 residents on the KISD campuses in 2020-21. I want to note that the name Principal Residence can be misleading. These are essentially assistant principal residencies. You can think of these as entry-level internships to campus administration. Also, this grant is only good for 1 year. We are not guaranteed this grant after next year. This is one of the risks involved in the grant and is one of the things applicants and campus and district leaders should keep in mind. When district and campus leaders talk to potential recruits, this risk should be clearly communicated. There is no guaranteed job at the end of the term of the grant or the residency. But even though there are risks, the grant has many potential benefits for the school district and for residents. Based upon historical turnover rates, we feel that there are going to be administrative placement opportunities for residents within the district in future years. There are other benefits besides these expected placement opportunities. Through the grant, residents will receive tuition assistance for the master's program, professional development opportunities, and on-the-job training and experience. The district has a financial match requirement for this grant. The district must match $15,000 per resident towards resident salaries. The total obligation for the district with the match requirements is $75,000. The majority of funds from the grant and the match will be used to fund resident salaries and benefits. Another benefit to our residents is generous and competitive compensation, with a total of $65,000 per resident per year in salary and benefits. I will break this down in a few slides as we look at our budget. As we look at this grant, I need to mention in this overview our partner, the University of Texas Tyler. University of Texas Tyler has participated in cycles 1 and 2 of the grant, supporting 54 residents from school districts that previously received the grant. In cycle 2 of the grant, in fact, UT Tyler residents had a passage rate of 82% on the new Texas Principal Certification exam. The new certification exam is different and more difficult than it used to be. Obtaining a principal certificate is not a one and done test anymore. It's also more expensive, and candidates must pass the exam and must submit artifacts to TEA and meet the requirements of PASL before they can get their certificates. The UT Tyler passage rate on the Texas Principal exam during the first year of the new test is competitive with other Texas graduate programs. Tuition for the Master's in Educational Administration program at UT Tyler is also very relatively inexpensive compared to similar programs. Tuition is just above $8,000. With books and fees, the cost of the Master's program is around $10,000. In this grant, the KISD residents, again as a benefit, will receive $10,000 in funding to cover the costs of tuition, books, and fees. The tuition assistance is another benefit to our residents. This money will be distributed either directly to the university or through in reimbursement, depending on the model chosen by KISD. In the coursework, residents will complete a 2-semester practicum that will include an authentic case study. The action research project by residents will require residents to address a campus need. UT Tyler will assign each resident a field supervisor to provide support and coaching. The master's program is a 30-hour degree program. It is also a 14-month program. Residents will start the program in May of 2020 and graduate in August of 2021. Besides tuition assistance and relevant coursework, another benefit of this grant is that we have earmarked about $20,000 or $4,000 per resident to develop a comprehensive professional development program. Part of the professional development funds will be used for the KISD Principal Residency Summer Institute for initial training and onboarding. The grant will also cover the training costs and certification testing costs for residents to receive several job-related certifications such as T-TEST, TPES, AEL, the Principal Certification Test, and PASL. In this grant, residents will also receive training and certification to learn how to interview and identify effective teachers in the hiring process through HumanX, which is an outside organization that specializes in these techniques. Finally, anytime the district hires employees, we must provide that employee with technology, so we have earmarked about $1,200 each to provide laptops for the residents. As we stated earlier, KISD is going to assign site mentors to each of the residents, and KISD will provide a training program for those mentors. For all of their efforts, the grant budget does set aside a $1,500 stipend for each of the program's mentors. And residents and mentors will receive professional development at the TEA Principal Residency Summer Institute. In the grant, we have earmarked funds to cover the travel cost of mentors and residents to this week-long institute in Austin. I do want to make a note because of the times. If TEA is unable to have a face-to-face summer institute, the district may not need as much money to cover these travel costs. In this case, I would recommend that KISD in their grant negotiations may choose an option to revise or negotiate this portion of the budget. At the beginning of this presentation, I provided a link to access the KISD grant application, which has the proposed total budget for the KISD Principal Residency Program. You can reference this in the next segment where I break down the grant budget per KISD Principal Resident. As we look at the budget, it is important for me to begin with our total funding for each resident. If you recall, I said that the grant provides $70,000 in funding for each resident, and then the district must match $15,000 for the salaries of each resident. The total budget for each KISD principal resident from the grant and the district match is $85,000. So now I will show you how we propose this breaks down for each resident. First of all, the compensation of each resident is based upon a $60,000 per year base salary with approximately $5,000 in associated benefits. The total compensation package for each KISD principal residency is approximately $65,000. Please note in our estimates, I used compensation figures from the KISD Finance Office for 2019-20. Some of these figures can change and will change depending on what the board does in 2021. So notice I left a little room for the compensation portion to grow. This portion of the budget will need to be adjusted according to the employee compensation policies adopted by the board in 2021. In the salary portion of the budget, we have also included a $1,500 stipend, as I mentioned before, for each resident mentor. In this section of each resident's budget, we did allocate approximately $10,000 for each resident to cover the cost of attendance to UT Tyler. You can see how we estimated and broke down those costs. I do want to note that this grant will not and does not cover the resident's application cost to UT Tyler, which is only about $25. Along with the tuition assistance, we have budgeted funds to help each principal resident pay for the cost of reviews, testing, and fees associated with obtaining their Texas principal certifications. The total of this cost is around $557 per principal resident. In this section of each resident's budget, I've grouped together professional development costs. This section includes the $4,000 for professional development cost I spoke of earlier, plus the $2,000 for travel costs for mentors and residents to attend the TEA Principal Resident Summer Institute. The total professional development budget for these two major groups of expenditures is $6,000 per resident. In this slide, you can see the breakdown of cost for individual job-related certifications such as T-TEST, TPES, AEL, and Humanix. In the next section of the budget, we have some individual line items. You can see that we've earmarked $1,200 to provide laptops for the residents, and also anytime the district receives a grant, we know there are going to be costs of implementing and administering the grant. For the principal residency grant, we've earmarked funds for these and other indirect costs. On this last slide of the budget section for each principal resident, you can see the budget summary for each of the categories that I just covered. You can see that we have established a budget for each principal resident that totals just under $85,000 annually, with some room for the district to make adjustments based upon the KISD employment compensation plan for the next year, which will be adopted by the board this summer. Again, the $85,000 annual budget for each resident will be funded with a combination of $70,000 per resident from the grant and $15,000 per resident from the district match requirements. As I wrap up part one of the presentation, I want to focus on our recruitment goal for the KISD 2020-21 Principal Residency Program. This is important because part two of this presentation will focus on the recruiting, application, interviewing, and hiring processes that the KISD Principal Resident Committee will develop in the coming weeks. In this TEA grant, I want everyone to know that TEA has stressed equity and they have stressed diversity, and that in our efforts, KISD will use methods to recruit and target candidates that mirror the diversity of our students. But currently, only 6 of our 14 campus administrators are from our district's minority populations. The current makeup of our campus administrators does not reflect the diversity of the students, and balancing that and achieving a better equity is a program grant goal. As we look at the diversity of our students, we can see that 42% of our students come from our white or Caucasian subpopulation, and approximately 58% of our students come from our minority or two or more race subpopulations. Therefore, in this grant, to mirror the diversity of our students, KISD has a goal for 60% of the KISD principal residents, or 3 of 5, to be from our minority subpopulations. I need all of our campus and district leaders to remember these targets and this goal. This is our recruitment goal as we move into the next part of our presentation that we need to keep in mind as we go over our recruiting, our application, interviewing, and hiring processes. I do want to mention that when we look at the breakdown of our campus administrators, currently Hispanics are underrepresented on our team. Also, currently only 3 of the 14 campus administrators are male. So we want to keep those things in mind as we recruit potential candidates to be principal residents in the KISD 2020-21 Principal Residency Program. Well, with those recruiting goals in mind, this is going to be the end of part 1 of this presentation. As the grant program is being developed and we give more information to our stakeholders and to our district and campus leaders, we have provided a contact information list in the meantime for district and university leaders involved with the KISD 2021 Principal Residency Grant Program. If you have questions for KISD leaders regarding the 2021 grant program, I suggest you send your questions to Chad G. Superintendent or Dr. Julie Vu, KISD Assistant Superintendent. KISD teachers and staff members who are interested in the Principal Residency Program and have questions about the UT Tyler Masters in Educational Administration Program or application processes to the graduate school at UT Tyler, they should contact Dr. Wes Hickey. This concludes part 1 of our video presentation regarding the KISD 2020-21 Principal Residency Grant Program.